All right, so we want to look at the guy who's going to lead the Montgomery bus boycott here. It's a man by the name of Martin Luther King Jr. Hopefully you've heard of him. He's got his own day and everything, right? The only non political figure um, to have his own federal holiday that we celebrate in January. I got a quote there for you on this first slide. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And he really becomes kind of the face of the modern civil rights movement. His dad was a Baptist minister. He became a Baptist minister, got a doctorate in theology over the course of his educational experience. And what we're going to see, and this is another one you could use for that essay you're writing, is the church, the black church taking a lead in some of these efforts to end segregation in the South. We already saw a little bit with the Montgomery bus boycott. His effectiveness there, the effectiveness of these nonviolent tactics, are going to bring a great deal of fame to Dr. King. And people really are anxious to see if this idea of nonviolent protest can work in other areas. He's going to found an organization called the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or the SCLC, and basically they go around the South leading these nonviolent campaigns to try to desegregate places in the South. He, in 1963, is going to take on one of the more racially charged cities during this modern civil rights era. It's the city of Birmingham. The city of Birmingham had so much violence in resistance to some of these nonviolent efforts, violence on behalf of the white community that was known as Bombingham. And so King goes down to Birmingham, organizes marches and protests, but the guy that's in charge in Birmingham is prepared for King. He's kind of studied the playbook, knows what King's going to do, and knows he's going to try and fill up the jails. So this director of public safety, a guy named Bull Connor, is going to basically have jails all kind of around the city of Birmingham and the city surrounding, clear out space because he knows he's going to be arresting some protesters. Well, one of the guys he's going to arrest is a guy named Martin Luther King Jr. Now, as King gets arrested, he's in Birmingham jail, and he's going to write probably the best explanation for his part of the civil rights movement in what becomes known as Letter from a Birmingham Jail. There are two things that are going to happen. He is going to open up the newspaper and he's going to read a letter from a group of white clergymen. I'm going to pop that letter up here. I'm not going to read it to you. But basically, what this letter is saying is we don't need outsiders coming in and telling us how to run our society. We hope that everybody in Birmingham will keep this in Birmingham and we'll work together, just us, to try to slowly make things better. Well, King's going to read this. He's going to start to scribble in the margins of the newspaper and on any paper he can find his response. And his response is known as the Letter from a Birmingham Jail. And that's linked up on the Canvas page for you as well. And so what's going to end up happening is that King lays out this idea that we don't want to wait. We've waited a long time. There's psychological damage that's being done as we wait. We don't want to put this off any longer. These are rights that basically have been given by God. And so if we need to be arrested for breaking these unjust laws, we're willing to do that. We're willing to make that sacrifice so the world can be a better place. But it is a fantastic work on civil rights. And he saw it in 1963. A little later in the year 1963, he's going to give one of the most famous speeches in American history. In August of that year, they are going to have a march on Washington. And he speaks, you can see him there on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. If you get a chance to go to Washington, D.C., there's actually a plaque on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial commemorating where King stood when he made the I Have a Dream speech. And probably you've heard a little bit of that. If you haven't, I'm going to link that on this playlist as well, so that you have a chance to listen to that speech. And it's incredible to hear him, uh, say those words. The idea that he has a dream that one day the people of this country will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And you can really get a feel for just what a dynamic speaker he was. In 1964, there is the Civil Rights Act will be signed not by John Kennedy, who was president during the March on Washington. He'll have been assassinated in November of that year, but by Lyndon Johnson. You can see Dr. King standing right behind Lyndon Johnson as he is signing this legislation. And the Civil Rights Act of 1964 eliminates segregation in all public places. So basically, anything that held 10 or more people was considered to be a public place and could now not be segregated. This is looked at as one of the high water marks of the modern civil rights movement. Doesn't mean things are perfect. It takes a while for those attitudes and even the laws, to a certain extent, to change to fit the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But it's definitely a step in the right direction. King doesn't quit work there. He's awarded a Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts in the modern civil rights movement. But once that desegregation law is signed, he turns much more not to the plight of just the black community, but the poor. The Vietnam War is starting to kick up at this point, and King looks and says, poor people and minorities are being sent in disproportionate numbers there. And so he speaks out against the war, very controversial stance when he's doing it. And in 1968, he's called to Memphis, Tennessee. And he's called there because the garbage workers in Memphis, Tennessee are having a strike. And so he's there to help that group out. And while he's there, he gives a speech. I'm going to put the speech on the playlist. I want you to watch the highlights of that speech. It's eerie. I want you, as you're watching, to think this is the night before Dr. King is assassinated. And he certainly sounds like a man who knows his time on earth is drawing to a close. It's known as the mountaintop speech. He's going to borrow the story of Moses from the Old Testament. It talks about going up to the mountaintop and seeing the promised land. But just keep in mind as you're seeing that this is the night before his assassination. This picture that you see is a picture in the aftermath of the assassination. A man named James Earl Ray is there at a place called the Lorraine Motel. James Earl Ray's at across the street, and as King comes out of his room, James Earl Ray will shoot him and kill him. Now, the Lorraine Motel, like I said, is in Memphis. The facade of the hotel is still there. It's one of the coolest historical places I think I've ever visited. The National Civil Rights Museum is actually built on the side of the Lorraine Motel, but they kept the facade of the hotel. So when you drive up, it looks very much like a 1960s motel. They also kept intact Dr. King's room in that hotel, preserved as it was in 1968. So if you ever get to Memphis, definitely a place to go and check out. 1968 is an election year, and so one of the guys running for president is a guy named Robert Kennedy, younger brother of John Kennedy, and he's actually giving a speech in Indianapolis the night that this happens. He's informed of what's happened to Dr. King, and so he switches his speech and gives another speech to the crowd. That's another one I'm going to put on the playlist for you for this modern civil rights unit. Listen to the words that he says, and understand that Indianapolis is one of the only major cities in the country that didn't experience the type of racial rioting that's going to happen in a lot of cities after the death of Dr. King. It's a very powerful speech. But Martin Luther King's legacy lives long past 1968. He very recently had a memorial put up on the mall in Washington, D.C. It's a cool place to go see all kinds of this huge statue of Dr. King coming out of stone, and quotes from his speeches that are around. but very much the face of this modern civil rights movement that we're going to see. And like I said, please take a chance now to check out those speeches and videos following this.